But yeah, I mean, obviously it's quite depressing what's happened. The kind of turn of events I think that we've seen. I mean, it's something that with like designs like Terra and Terra itself, we thought would materialize for quite some time. This sort of stablecoin model, but there is. Yeah, it's just I find it sort of very unpleasant to watch. It's there are many stories of the like serious consequences that many people have faced, like losing money and work. People have really had a horrible time with this, and it's caused a real kind of I mean, yeah, I'm sure it's destroyed some people's lives. So I think that's really awful, basically. So I find like this sort of thing horrible to see. And yeah, and also I think it underlines the kind of responsibility and like seriousness of experimenting in this space, and also trying to build stablecoins as well. These are very they can become assets that become incredibly important for people. So these are my sort of responses to what we've seen in the last week or so.
I've just been told that we weren't live when we actually started, so let me just do the intro again. We on the stream we have with us Brian Gross from Ichi, and we also have Lewis and Arya from Gyroscope. Lewis, we actually picked up just as you were starting to talk, so that's good. But that's who's on the stream with us today. Now, Arya, it was your tweets that first got me interested in what you're building at Gyroscope, specifically because you were saying things that other people were not saying, and you were saying them quite forcefully as well. So I'm just curious now, in the light of all of this, how do you feel about what you were saying all the way back then?
Yeah, I guess you're talking about the Terra tweets from last May, probably here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I echo Lewis's sentiment here. The whole situation is a bit depressing. I don't think anybody enjoys watching these things break. But it's also an opportunity, I guess, for the whole space to kind of like reflect on how new systems are built and to try to raise the bar about what a good stablecoin can be. So I try to be a little optimistic too that we can at least learn from the instance.
Brian, as I was saying before the stream, I commend you for coming on and facing the press, as it were. Ichi was going great, but then it didn't. So I'm curious how you viewed all of this from the position of having been through all of that yourself.
Yeah, so it is different. Ichi's core protocols were unaffected in our failure, except for the branded dollars that deposited to the lending pool. But we did have our own run up in leverage and deleverage event. It happens really, really quickly. I feel for the people building, for the people who suffered losses. And I think everybody in their life at some point has a story about leverage. I think it's dangerous. It needs to be monitored, controlled to protect communities. And I don't think that the controls in DeFi are there yet. I think we see this again and again with Terra now, with Ichi. Our lending pool, it was easy to set up. It was something that we thought of as an experiment. But once you provide that drug of leverage, people just keep using it and demand more and play that game. So you have to think of all the controls ahead of time.
You really do. And I think with Gyroscope, you have been thinking through controls and all the different scenarios. I wonder if you could give people at home, Ari or Lewis, just the top line of what Gyroscope is designed to do and how it would be different from UST.
Well, I'll start with it, and then I guess I could fill in. So, like there are a few like fundamental differences in design, essentially. the most fundamental is basically like revolves around collateral and collateralization. So the kind of perhaps main feature of our design is that this is reserve backed, like 100% reserve backed. So this, yeah, and then so this is in contrast to the kind of what has become the definition of algorithmic stablecoin, which would be like not 100% reserve backed. So I think, yeah, in the sort of intro, you kind of alluded to Gyroscope as an algorithmic stablecoin, but this isn't like, this classification doesn't apply to us. It's not like this, yeah, algorithmic has come to mean not 100% reserve backed, and we just like fundamentally disagree with that as a model for stablecoin design. So this is like the first kind of main feature to highlight. But then like in turn, the reserve that we have is split up into like different compartments, essentially, to diversify different types of risk that could materialize. So for example, like price risk, regulatory risk, and so on, all of these things, we split them into different compartments in this reserve to try to limit to the greatest extent that we can the kind of possibility of contagion between different financial assets. So yeah, this is like, yeah, the first like big difference is about like how we think about reserves and how we treat reserves. And then the second is about like how we actually do the pricing that would convert like assets into stable coins in our system. So the state, like the Gyroscope stablecoin. So we do this in a like rules-based, like autonomous way with a mechanism that will explicitly price the sort of minting and redemption based on sort of the state of the reserve and so on. But yeah, there's that's, yeah, I think that the main thing is about this like reserve ratio, essentially, and our sort of belief about the importance of collateral.
Yeah, and I think there's, when we say algorithmic, I tend to use that as there are mechanisms in place which are defined by rules and code, rather than necessarily what UST is, which is this kind of, it's based on confidence, essentially. So I think,
yeah,
I would still class Gyroscope as an algorithmic stablecoin because I believe that exists. Like the way you maintain the peg is determined that way. But I think that's kind of where we've got to. Everyone is dancing on algorithmic stablecoins graves right now. They say it's dead. It's an experiment that mustn't happen, that cannot happen again. And I would counter that by saying, actually, there are really good examples of where I think there can be something genuinely robust. And I think that's built into what you have designed here. But I mean, how far have you gamed out worst case scenarios, for your protocol defense? Aria, why don't you take this one?
So essentially, we've spent we were coming out of PhDs. We spent a fair amount of our work in our PhDs sort of mapping out the different risk factors across DeFi and across stablecoins. And we are kind of taking that framework, applying it to how this reserve should be autonomously managed, so that as closely as possible, we can like segregate the different risks between different buckets within this this reserve structure. That's one area. You can do that using sort of the risk framework we've set up in our earlier papers, but there's still a lot of other things that you need to control for as well. So Lewis already talked about kind of this this primary market structure, this issuance structure for how would you price minting and redeeming of a stablecoin. There's a lot that has to go into this too, and you can kind of see a parallel in what happened with UST as like a motivating example here. So UST over the last year kind of moved a bit from being full seniored shares to also being partly reserve backed, which is why you can kind of draw this comparison. And then when they were going through their reserves, although I guess there's still a little bit of transparency that needs to happen about exactly what happened there. Essentially, like they applied all of the reserves to trying to manage the peg, and basically at the end exhausted their reserves. And that's not necessarily the best monetary policy for such a setting. If in our case we start fully reserved, but of course all of these assets are on-chain assets, they have their own risks. If something did materialize about those risks, we want this issuance market to be able to handle that. And so that's what goes into the design of these sort of minting and redemption curves, where you account for the fact that something could happen to these assets, and you want some sort of graceful unwinding to be possible so that the system can still survive and potentially recover later, and not in a situation where you've just exhausted the whole system and kind of wrecked the economy that's building around this stablecoin. There's also other areas which have come up recently about like oracle risks, because obviously all stablecoins, if you're pegging to something off chain like a dollar, you have to have some sort of oracles, and you need to manage the risks of those oracles and also manage the risk of code bugs that might come up. And so we have a number of new circuit breakers that we're building into Gyroscope that are designed to think about this ahead of time and kind of autonomously manage, pause the system under dangerous situations. And I think this is a really important thing to be building into to new DeFi protocols.
Yeah, absolutely. The Oracle risk, I remember back in the day, DeFi hacks were always Oracle exploits of some description, just, cheating the price. And those circuit breakers, I mean, everyone gets really pissed off when they put them on in the stock exchange. I think they did one recently with GameStop, right? But they're there for a reason. And do you think, had UST had circuit breakers built in, that it might have mitigated some of what we saw last week?
Well, I think it depends how those circuit breakers were designed. And actually, I think there are some rudimentary circuit breakers that were in Terra's redemption mechanism. But the important thing that we're doing for Gyroscope, at least, is designing these like from the ground up, from first principles, about there are certain properties we want the system to be able to attain, and how do we design the mechanisms that actually get us to those properties.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, I want to return to you.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, fine. You had something to add. No, go ahead. But then we'll jump back to it.
One of the things I've always found useful in figuring out what causes something is to continue to ask 5 whys. And somewhere inside the 5 whys of what happened with Terra is this assumption that stablecoin success is somehow tied to circulating stablecoins. Why were there 20 billion UST out there, and what were they being used for? And I think that stable coins are this utility function. It's a peg to a dollar. The amount of money that economy needs has to do with more about the services that you buy, the people and what they're storing, the productivity of it. And this idea that you get success just by minting more and more money, I would just take some issue with. I think that the network effects, they generate around the scarce reserve asset. So that's what the incentive is in Bitcoin, the scarce reserve asset. We argue that you need this stable medium of exchange, but how much of it do you need? It's not, it itself isn't by definition not scarce, not a great incentive to pull people together, and not that defensible. This showed that the moment that the peg was lost, it could unwind in 2 to 3 days. So there were no network effects. Right. And so I think what I hope is that incidents like this cause the industry to move past just discussing the mechanics of stable coins, and instead discussing the more important things related to stable coins, like who profits from them, where does the signage go, what are we trying to build, and how do we want to impact the world?
Do we need stable coins? I think that's the question that everyone's asking. Like, do we actually need them? And I think it's a fair question to ask in this time. Like, why do we need a stable coin? Everyone's like, it's the core kind of rotating peg of DeFi, but why do we need them?
Yeah, so using macroeconomics as an analogy, a small country that's introducing its currency might use a peg to the dollar for some period of time, just so that people can transact easier. And that's what I meant by utility function. But they're still only going to make as much money as the economy needs. And I think that's where these schemes to incentivize way more than what you need, because it's deemed inherently good to have more, is what I would call into question.
So that brings me to Gyroscope again. So what is the issuance mechanic at Gyroscope? Because I know, like with USDC, it's you have to deposit $1, so it's quite slow to produce. When UST wasn't, it could just generate it. But how would we produce a Gyroscope stablecoin dollar? Lewis, I'm sorry. I'll tell you. I'll say which guy I want to speak. Make it a bit easier for you. Lewis, go ahead.
So through the primary market AMM that we've built, essentially. So there's you can see let's say what would be the right word? There's like a toy version of the mechanics on our testnet for the primary market, where you essentially would go with assets like DAI, USDC, and so on. And you can put these assets in a basket, and then you can mint units of stablecoin. The process is similar in reverse, essentially. So you would be converting units of stablecoin into some underlying assets. But of course, the challenge is like in how you exactly do this pricing, like between the assets. So each asset that you're putting into this like input basket has some price. You need to be sure about the price, like the oracle price of this asset that is coming in, and then you need a way to determine how many units you should be making of your stablecoin based on these prices and amounts and so on. So this is where and also, you need to reflect, certainly on the redemption side. You also need to think very carefully about like the state of your reserve and like outflows and so on from the reserve, and this sort of consideration. So the way in which we have done this pricing is like one of the like main contributions that we're making, more or less. So it's a sort of long technical paper. And we're sort of just starting to talk about that now. But it's not easy to do this. Essentially, this like coming up with a proper kind of way to actually like determine the stablecoin price based on asset prices.
Keeping a dollar peg is not as easy as people might think, and I think that's something that's slightly underestimated. I believe the Hong Kong dollar, they had to chase the peg recently for like 800 million just to keep it in line, and this is like Hong Kong we're talking about. So it's not a straightforward thing at all. We have a comment here from 24KJ. No real life use for any of these, currently 100% useless. Hopium, fact. Anyone care to answer that? It's an existential crisis for stablecoins right now. It looks like.
Yeah, when you walk down the street in the average city and you look around and you see people and you see them buying coffee and buying other things, you know they're not transacting with stable coins. So there's some element of truth that we're only at the very beginning of this. But we also know that people, they want to reason about things in something that's familiar to them. They want to think about their DeFi positions in terms of dollars. When people purchase things like NFTs online, they do it with stable coins. And stable coins have gone from a very small part of crypto just a few years ago to a very large part of crypto, where most of the TVL and in protocols is made up of it. So I don't think it's going to go away, because that's what people want and you might not like what they're doing, but they think that it's amazing. So I don't think it's just hopium.
Well, yes, there's no doubt that USDT, and I looked yesterday, what is it, $70 billion market cap, although USDC is actually catching up very fast. It was interesting looking at the issuance graph. The USDC went like almost on a hockey stick up, and USDT went down, and BUSD also went up. I think people believe in BUSD quite a lot more thanks to Paxos, thanks to it being in New York, and so there's definitely a shift in the flavor of stablecoins. But I think what you were doing at Ichi was really interesting, Brian, and I remember being really hopeful that you were trying to solve a problem that no one had really sought to solve before. But it seems like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it actually, I want to separate the branded dollar from Rari Fuse Pool number 136, which impacted Ichi's price. Branded dollars that didn't deposit to that pool were unaffected, even as the project that launched the protocol is having a bad day. And that's what we mean by uncorrelated demand, and the fact that communities should have their own money. That money should be useful not just for holding, it should be useful for spending. And the communities that used Ichi and didn't deposit to Rari were unaffected. So people like to use price charts as proxies for how a project's doing, but there was a time where Ichi went from $10 to 24 cents because of a problem with our code, and that was a darker day than today. In this case, it wasn't a problem with our code. It's a problem with the lending pool that we were overexposed to.
Which I have to say, it was kind of your fault, right? You made some mistakes. You made some mistakes,
right.
And then you got seriously bitten in the ass by
it was thought that 20% of reserves could be put in that lending pool, and that's not the case. So we won't be using lending pools like that again.
What was there a danger that you got complacent, or you read the market wrong, or you maybe underestimated the voracious appetite of people to exploit anything you gave them?
Yeah, it just is. We just did not think that people would take a couple $100,000 and borrow tens of millions and use the tens of millions to solely buy Ichi. It seems crazy, and the people who did it got wrecked. So sometimes you don't think about the things people might do that have no profit incentive.
Well, no, I don't think anyone thought someone would take $1 billion and use it to exploit, the number 5 or whatever it was network at the time. That just seems preposterous, and yet it happened. And so here we are.
Yeah, you have to think of this stuff. And we didn't think of it prior to launching the lending pool. We tried to control the risk once it was going, but you can't do that easily when the necessary controls aren't built into the lending platform.
Yeah, so the composability factor here, that you're reliant on other things. So for you guys at Gyroscope, your AMM, how is that designed? Because that feels like it's a point of failure potentially, or somewhere something could go wrong. Because AMMs are, they are what they are. But I'm curious, what scenarios you've put together to think about, worst case scenario, if you even have thought of worst case scenario for Gyroscope. Aria.
Yeah, well, the worst case scenario is really that you have a code bug, and these are sort of things that you can't really you can't be sure it doesn't exist completely. This is why we spend a lot of time and an effort auditing the protocol properly, testing the protocol properly, and rolling out carefully. But it's a long process, and really the truth is in it surviving for a long time. So obviously it's experimental when it comes out, but we've built in sort of these safeguard mechanisms, these circuit breakers, that if there is a code bug, at least these circuit breakers kind of mitigate the damage that can happen. And so one circuit breaker that's easy to illustrate here, at least, is if you look at sort of like inflows and outflows to through this primary market AMM, so through minting and redeeming of in our system, what we do is we have sort of an ultra short-term flow logging mechanism, and we have sort of allowances that are allowed to move in and out of the system under very short time frames. And if you exceed those, then the system just automatically trips a circuit breaker, and you have a pause period. And during this pause period, there's the ability for some people with governance power to come in and extend that pause period if it's needed as well. So the ability to kind of like autonomously trip some circuit breakers if something suspect is happening, so that you can't sort of like exploit the whole protocol value is quite important, I think.
Oh, I would say so. I would say so. I'm just checking in on the Terra vote, because I don't know if you saw Do's proposal to rebirth the network, to fork it, to issue 1 billion tokens, and then call the old one Luna Classic. I think it's Terra Classic. It looks like the vote is overwhelmingly in favor of this. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one, Brian.
Yeah, we had to hold a similar vote. It's a tough thing, because you're allocating this new token and trying to figure out how to do it, and people have different strategies. Some of those people were probably just anchor suppliers. Other people had long lunar exposure. But I think at the end of the day, if you know, and I haven't seen the results of their vote, people in this space actually do care about the other people that were impacted. And so when there's a chance to make people whole and move forward, people tend to pull together. Our vote passed with 98% approval. So I'm not surprised that they're finding a path forward. And I really doubt that their ecosystem's dead. I mean, the people, yeah, I liken it to people building together after a hurricane, and you're kind of surprised how quickly things can come back together.
Yeah, that has been 100% the message coming out of the Terra camp. It's been really interesting tracking the story this week and seeing the anger, the hope, and then the kind of dismay. But then, oh wait, this isn't dead.
Yeah.
There was a horrifyingly contrite blog from Delphi Digital that came out today. I tried to get them on the stream to join us today, because they made a massive bet on Terra and it blew up in their faces, and now they're left hanging, basically just holding a bunch of garbage that they've invested a lot of time into. But as you rightly say, there's things that have been built there. There's good ideas that have been implemented, and there was a lot of goodwill that was directed that way, and a lot of great intellectual capital. But then you have this leader figure, Do Kwon, who increasingly became difficult to parse out. And like, Aria, I noticed that you stopped kind of going after him after a while, because I guess it was just falling on deaf ears. But were you keeping track of Do's public announcements and what he was saying?
Yeah, he was quite extreme in what he was saying. I mean, I'd never really stopped sort of like trying to help understand like the Terra ecosystem, but I did kind of shift to building Gyroscope, I guess.
Yeah, there's only so many times you can cry wolf before you kind of get bored. But I was just reading back through some old tweets of his, and it's just like why didn't we say more? Because we covered Terra a lot on the channel as well, and we were like, oh look, Anchor 20%. This could be really good for small holders who can put some stablecoins in, and that seems relatively safe. And of course, it's not safe at all, not at all. So I still think there is a place for a fixed rate of interest paying out more than, you know, the crappy US bank accounts are paying out, or anywhere in the world right now. But I'm curious, Lewis, whether you see a future for something like Anchor, maybe at a lower interest rate, but something that pays out like a decent rate of return, and whether Gyroscope would ever fit into something like that. Because I think for people outside of crypto, just the opportunity to make your money just beat inflation would be a really nice thing.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it's quite just as we were talking, I mean, there's this like quite. You sort of remarked on why you hadn't been more vocal at the time, or whatever. I think like what's interesting about a lot of like this space, and it's certainly not at all unique to this kind of this industry, but is like the extent to which like group and crowd psychology is shared, and sentiments towards things, and like the way that people will cohere around certain ideas, or basically certain perceptions of things being safe. So you see in all sorts of different ways, like strong networks forming around ideas that can be sometimes just a function of like the number of participants, and not really anything to do with like what the actual idea is it's being formed around. And I think this is like one dynamic that we see everywhere in human behavior, essentially, in all markets, everywhere. It's really not unique to crypto. And I think, of course, the difference with what we're doing is that there are fewer safeguards. There's much less regulation, if any. It's like easier for things to be put in a kind of production environment. So I think, to answer your question like directly, I mean, yeah, for protocols that could pay out some sort of steady return, I mean, sure, it's not aware of any sort of fundamental reason why this isn't possible, but it all comes down to like proving out that the kind of core like risk that's being taken is sustainable, and that the kind of business model of this payout is sustainable, and not not some kind of temporary like flash in the pan that just exists because many people have coalesced around an idea. And I guess overall very optimistic that eventually like ideas that make sense and that attract a strong network will succeed, provided things are done in a kind of responsible way and things are built slowly and carefully. I mean, this is a experimental industry. The technology is new, and we're sort of learning its potential. But yeah, I mean, very optimistic about the future. We just need to be careful.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because we have within our crypto sphere, we have Bitcoin maxis who are going, "Told you so." Bitcoin is the only sound money. Michael Saylor saying, this is the only true hedge against inflation. It's the only one that makes any kind of sense whatsoever. And then you have the likes of Nuro Rubini saying, "This is a bubble. It's a scam. It's the biggest scam in human history." And shouting and screaming from the rooftops that all of crypto is a scam and you can't be trusted. And then issuing his own tokenized hedge against inflation, which was interesting last week. I've just picked up on Justin Sun's US double D. Only Justin could call it US double D. Beautiful. So he says the Tron DAO Reserve is going to set its basic risk-free interest rate to 30% per annum. I have so many issues with US double D, not least of which it's Justin Sun, but the whole idea of a risk-free interest rate of 30% per annum. I mean, he's still publicizing it. He's still marketing it. Like, if you had Justin on the stream with us now, Brian, what would you say to him?
So I remember 2 years ago, somewhere in there, I went through and I read all the details of the top 100 projects, and I was trying to find ones that I thought were actually doing something that would matter to real people, to somebody earlier. And the list was down to Terra and Crypto.com, as they were both providing discounts on spending, which people love, and they were solving the other half of the puzzle that Bitcoin didn't solve. Like, I can't just keep this money. I have to spend it someday. Now then they went and tried to compete against Bitcoin on holding money with Anchor. And why? I mean, Bitcoin's an incredible store of value. We made one BTC so that it would hold more Bitcoin and give you a medium of exchange. That makes sense to me. Just hiking up interest rates to keep stablecoins around that have no network effects, like I talked about earlier. It's a utility function. Why spend that much money on people just storing stablecoins in a wallet when there's obviously no source of revenue that can enable you to pay that in a safe way.
Yeah.
Long term. It's just I think we know the reason why, and it's not long term thinking.
It's definitely not long-term thinking. It's just racing after the next shiny thing and copying it, because that's what he does. And
Yeah.
you can't show me a single thing that he's done that hasn't been a copy or a fork or some kind of facsimile of something that he saw. I mean, he literally does it on Twitter. He says, "We are echoing Nayib Bukele in blah blah blah. We're echoing so and so." It's insane, and yet he's still around and still valid, or still in some way validated by the fact that there's so much value still in that network.
I had a manager one time tell me I was saying the same thing, and he goes, "There's a lot of money in copycats." Yeah, stuck with me.
There is, and it's interesting again that, I mean, I love Gyroscope because it's not a copycat. It's a genuinely innovative and new solution to a problem, and I think it's telling that it's taken you a very, very long time to even feel confident enough to go on testnet. I think that's pretty telling. So, you know, do you stay up all night kind of balancing equations and figuring stuff out? You know, just scaring yourself to sleep thinking, have we got it wrong?
You should.
I mean, to some extent, you know, it's basically, it's a grave responsibility once you start to allow the creation of a stable coin, because like precisely for what we saw with UST, it can become very important in people's lives, like stable coins. So it is, you know, we take it really seriously. It's like not these things scale up quickly, and they can, you know, become systemic, and this is not and also it's like, it is very sort of fatiguing seeing things fall apart quite often. So and I mean, as you know, in regard to how we sort of spend the early hours of the morning, I mean, a fair amount of this time is spent fighting with you know, Brownie and other bits of testing software and all sorts of other things. But you know, it's I mean, we actually got onto testnet relatively quickly. I think we've been on testnet for about a year or so. But the version of what we have built, which will be sort of coming out at some point relatively soon, is, in terms of like functionality and so on, is very significantly more advanced. So you know, we're excited about it, but at the same time, it's hopefully made the point that it's something that we really are kind of worried about and trying to do as kind of conscientiously and as carefully as possible.
Well, I think if Doe's done one thing, it's guaranteed that there will be a lot more heat on any stable coin now than there ever was. And if you can pass through that heat unscathed, or at least in good shape, then you're probably going to be okay. But I mean, there is going to be some form of regulation for stablecoins, specifically if Janet Yellen has her way. Do you keep up with the dialogue around those things, and are you aware of what's being said and how it's being said, and is there a sense to which you have to kind of like really manage the way that the project is set up, or are you just going after innovation and then seeing whether you can fit to what they say?
And it's a balance, but you know, the view on regulation and so on. I mean, this is like, regulation can also really like enable markets, and can really also be a very like benevolent force. I think like I'm not a sort of fan of kind of branding regulation as intrinsically like unwelcome thing, which I think can sometimes be the sort of vibe in crypto. This is just patently false in my view. Like, we have, like you see real like consumer harm and detriment that has occurred in recent past, and in some cases, like regulation would probably be able to help mitigate this. And as an industry overall, for everything to scale up, it's like obviously very important that these sort of things can't happen so easily, and that people aren't like badly affected. I think this like kind of responsibility on like avoiding consumer harm and detriment is often at the heart of a lot of like regulatory guidance, and like why a lot of regulation at least comes about. And yeah, I'm not sure how you could really how someone could really argue against wanting to prevent that. But then of course the debate becomes like exactly how this is done, and exactly what is regulated, and exactly what's in scope. And yeah, I mean, let's see. But in principle, like, should things be regulated to sort of prevent consumer harm? I think it's like it's obviously it should be, but the devil's always in the detail.
Yeah, we had Matty Greenspan on last week, and he's very vehemently on the side of investors are smarter than you think, and they're free to make their own mistakes, and therefore, buyer beware, that kind of thing. But I think in this instance, a lot of people just they could have benefited from some form of protection, and this is where we are. This is the space that we're in. Brian, I want to come back to you and really dig into how you kind of reacted after things went bad, and how you've managed to rebuild confidence, if at all, in your project and what you've been doing, because I think it's got to have been tough.
Well, actually, we focused a little more on angel vaults than branded dollars since the beginning of the year, and branded dollars themselves aren't a stable coin. There's a reason why I didn't call it stable coins. They use stable coins and other assets. They're basically a treasury management function. A branded dollar could be a customer of Gyroscope, Frax, UST, USDC, and on regulatory matters, even if a CBDC came out, we would just use that as the stability function instead. But that said, we have been focusing a lot on angel vaults because liquidity is just this lifeblood of every project, and it's the best use for every project's own money, their own stable coin. And our pipeline of projects that want to have their own angel vault is undeterred by a lending market. So we'll be launching some new ones next week. So yeah, it again, I think people get way too fixated on price. Our biggest backers, the people who know us best, they tell us that their opinion of Ichi today is not any different than it was 2 months ago, which is not any different than it was a year ago. And it's always been binary. We think it will work. When it does, I guess we'll see where the price ends up. But if not, it'll probably be worthless. So what it is on any given day, we just try not to think about that.
But you must have taken a lot of crap, I would imagine.
Yeah, you get the people who aren't close to you, and they're feeling really strong, typing in a forum or on Twitter. But it's pretty interesting when you pick up the phone and talk to them. Their level of crap goes to 10% pretty quickly, as they learn more about what happened, and it isn't. Honestly, maybe I'm naive. I think all the people are awesome. I've talked to so many awesome people since this problem. I had people that hadn't been involved with Ichi for over a year reaching out and asking how they could help. And so I would say positive interactions, there've been 10 for every one negative.
So people tend to equate price with performance, with sentiment. If you have a stable coin, it doesn't deviate in price. But what for Gyroscope will define success? Have you set up metrics for where you kind of want to be in a year or 2 years' time with the project? That's to Lewis.
I mean, it's I think the ultimate success for stablecoins is people using it for real transactions. So,
but what do you define by a real transaction? Because I mean, a lot of it's just to power trading and leverage, right? USDT is primarily just to trade between BTC and back again. So what constitutes like a real transaction for you?
So I mean, certainly this like performing as a kind of risk off asset is a very like important function in DeFi and in the crypto space. Like precisely for the same reason that stablecoins are needed and important, which is that so much of crypto is very volatile, and this makes it very difficult to use units as like a means of payment, because you just like don't. You just, if you're paying with a very volatile asset, you don't really know what you're paying in terms of like a more stable currency, or what might be, or like a national fiat currency. But then, yeah, I mean, of course, the vision is that that stablecoin is used for transactions with merchants and transactions in places of commerce, and can be used to buy goods and services. This is like this I think also should be the kind of end goal for a successful stablecoin. But it's a long road.
I think that was probably the most heartbreaking thing for me, was seeing the Chai Payments app. I saw Alice. There was a bunch of projects that were doing exactly that with UST. They built their entire business model specifically to do that, and it created some really elegant and beautiful things on UST. And then like it was just full PR defense panic mode, and it's like, well, where are we now? Well, you don't have a stablecoin anymore. That's gone away. So it's got to have been brutal, absolutely brutal. And I'm personally like really interested and excited by algorithmic stablecoins. I think they, on an experimental level, they have something really interesting to tell us about the way we issue money. And even if you just go back and look at how much money the Fed printed between March 2020 and now, it beggars belief. It's so gargantuan. You just think that this never goes back. You however much kind of you tighten things, this never goes back. So where are we in 5 and 10 years time? I genuinely don't know. So I guess that's my last question for you guys. Like, where do you think the US dollar goes in the next 5 to 10 years? Let's start with you, Arya. Big blue sky question.
If I could predict that, like I wouldn't need to do anything else, right? It's kind of something that's really hard to predict, how these economic systems are going to evolve. I think there's certainly a lot of risks that are coming up, but it's also important to kind of like illustrate quickly how this like expansion of the US dollar is a bit different than like what happens in like algorithmic stablecoins, because I think it's kind of popular to say like the US dollar is just another algo stablecoin, but at least in this respect, it's a bit different. What's happening in these like quantitative easing sort of scenarios, which is where this big expansion is coming from, is that you do have the Fed like expanding the balance sheet, which is much different than just like issuing stable coins and then directing the issuance proceeds of those stable coins to something like shareholders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, then it's still though it's alarming, and it
doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good idea, but it is still fundamentally different.
Yeah, it is fundamentally different, but and also I don't think they had any other choice at that point. But that was following 20 years of probably mismanagement or things going wrong and a housing crisis and all these kind of things, and so here we are. But it does make you think, like, what is the future of the US dollar? And
can they unwind this balance sheet?
No, they can't
in a graceful way. Yeah,
I mean, they definitely cannot. No,
they're certainly trying to. I don't know what's going to happen.
Empires crumble. That's what happens.
We like to talk about buying coffee with crypto. I can predict in 5 years, if a cup of coffee costs 30 Satoshis today, it'll be something less than that in 5 years. If that's $4 today, it's going to be something more than that in 5 years.
I mean, do you guys spend crypto in your daily lives? Do you find a way to work it into, like, I'm going to load up a debit card and then I'm going to spend it? Because like I know hodl is the thing, but like I've been really trying to spendle, if that's even a word.
Spindle.
Spendle.
That's one of the. I have one of the crypto.com debit cards. That's a good example. Or there's one with Coinbase. I mean, I think that the store of value function of crypto has been there for quite some time, and then once you're using debit cards that you top up with crypto, the next step is just to simply not pay Visa anymore, right? So to me, I think the shift will happen. Probably it's tough to figure out when, but it will. And I also think that again, when you then think about balances of stablecoins and the real most important question is who profits from those balances. And so the idea that the whole world is going to use one stablecoin and give all the profits backing it to a single project or entity doesn't make sense to me. That bargaining power of merchants and consumers and communities matters. So I think I'm optimistic that every community will have their own stablecoin, maybe even every celebrity, who knows?
Oh, good Lord. Can you imagine the trading volume of Yeezy coin? Oh my goodness.
If they're standardized, they just swapped one for one. Like when I send $1 from Bank of America to Wachovia, there's no trading fee. I got Wachovia $1 and now I have a Bank of America $1. These aren't different. People get too caught up in the network effects of stable coins. It's just a utility.
And in this case, it's the biggest story in town.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, I think we all know that the exchanges are the ones making all the money, come rain or shine, and will continue to do so for time eternal. Which is why,
and the market makers, which is why you should look at angel vaults. Yeah,
market makers.
Yeah.
Yes, look at Hummingbird. Well, thanks, guys. This was informative and instructive, and I hope for both of your projects that you come through with flying colors and launch what I think are really interesting and strong products into the market. So thank you very much to Brian from Ichi. Thanks very much to Aria from Gyroscope and Lewis also from Gyroscope. This was the Defiant. Are Algo stablecoins dead? I don't think so. Thanks so much for joining us. It's time to hear from our sponsors.
Earn up to $2,500 in NFT rewards from top collections like Mutant Ape Yacht Club, Azuki, Doodles, and more when you sign up for Slingshot's mobile waitlist. Slingshot is a Web3 trading platform where you can discover and trade over 7,500 crypto tokens at the best prices at lightning fast speed. With a super sleek, intuitive UI, you feel like you're trading on a centralized exchange when you're actually trading DeFi. Trade now on desktop and make sure to grab your slot on the mobile waitlist. Sign up at slingshot.finance/the Defiant. Decentralization of Ethereum gives us security. Layer 2 protocol Arbitrum gives us low-cost transactions. TracerDAO's perpetual pools gives us liquidation-free, long-term leveraged tokens. The combination of all three of these unlocks the full potential of DeFi. Using Tracer, you can take long or short positions with leverage to trade anything: commodities, cryptocurrencies, equities, even NFTs. Dive into perpetual pools at tracer.finance and learn more about this exciting release with The Voyage, a 6-week journey in Tracer's perpetual pools to earn TCR rewards and explore the potential.